kicking off the idea from Madgwicks. David Galbally QC, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
Sell me.
Well, it's a very simple idea, and that is that we have a levy similar to the Medicare levy for legal services, so that everyone, 1%, 2%, makes a contribution, and then they have free legal services up until a certain amount of, say, 50,000, and limited to non-criminal matters.
Okay, so I'd be paying, what am I paying Medicare levy at the moment, 2%?
2%, so you pay 1.5, 2%, but it's capped the amount that you can get. Well, it would, but it would also fund, for instance, legal aid, which would be available for big cases that would continue in crime and immigration matters and things like that, that needed the people who needed legal assistance for big crimes, so that you'd cap it in terms of the legal advice. We are more and more subject to regulation and laws, and more we find that we are challenging or questioning the relevant authorities as to what they're doing, whether it's right or wrong, and we need legal advice.
Don't you think it would make us more litigious, more likely to sue? If I'm paying a large, well, not a slice, but a slice of my income in tax to get a legal coverage, legal insurance in a sense, and I've got a blue with the neighbour about the dog, I want to go to court. I want to get my value out of the money I've been paying over. Let's sue.
It may initially encourage people to take matters to places such as VCAT, but I think in the long term it gets people around the table if you go to a place like VCAT, because you've got to mediate, you've got to talk, and so it gives people also the opportunity to get legal advice. You'd be amazed at the number of people that just want advice. They want advice in relation to their wills. They want advice in relation to whether or not they can protect their privacy. They want advice in terms of issues that arise in their employment. And they want advice in relation to generally goods and services that they produce or that they receive. And in order to get that, they've got to pay for it. And the law is becoming out of reach of the normal everyday person.
96900 693 13 13 32. Would you object to paying a percentage, a levy? Paying a levy which would give you access to legal advice and legal representation if necessary. Would you object to it? There's another element to this too. Do you find the law too expensive? Have you consulted or used legal representation and found it is just too expensive, that you couldn't go ahead, or you did go ahead and it cost you a pile? Is the law too expensive? 96900 693 13 13 32. Would you cover family court matters with this?
Yes, I would cover family court.
Very expensive.
Well, of course it does. And there are a lot of people who can't afford to get the proper advice, particularly at the initial stages, and custody matters. See, it's not just lawyers that are expensive either. I mean, there's a lot of criticism levelled at lawyers, but accountants charge not much less than what lawyers charge. But they're not used necessarily as much. There's plenty of times now that we come across situations where we need to get advice. And I find that myself, where things happen and you've got to get some advice.
What about conveyancing? I mean, the average person will deal with lawyers, I guess, on conveyancing, family law. They usually don't get into much else.
I think conveyancing is terribly important, because one of the costs involved for young people to purchase houses or units or land is the conveyancing cost. So you've got the stamp duty issue, and then on top of that you've got to pay the conveyancing cost. And it would be good if you had a levy where they didn't have to pay the conveyancing cost.
Hello, Kate, go ahead.
Oh, hi, Neil. Look, I think this is a terrible idea. I don't need the government telling me how to budget my money and when I should spend it and how. If I need legal advice, I will fund that myself. And, I don't need the government taking money just in case I might need legal advice sometime in the future.
David Galbally?
Well, there will be a time that you will need to get some legal advice. And if it's not you, there will be people in your position that will need it who can't afford it. And this is an opportunity to provide a way in which the whole of the community can have access to legal advice. At the moment, it's very limited because of the cost of it.
Kate, what do you think?
Well, David, I had to get legal advice just recently, actually. And yes, it was a costly impost, but at the end of the day, I managed that cost. I dealt with it myself. Is the government going to tell me that I'm not capable of doing that? I think it's actually being disrespectful to people, saying you can't manage your own money and your own financial affairs.
No, this has got nothing to do with saying to you that you can't manage your own money or manage your own final affairs. This is providing a safety net for those people that can't afford legal advice when they need it because their incomes are low and they happen to pay a levy over time so that when they need legal advice they can go and get it. That's what it's about. It's not about telling you how do you spend your money.
Well, yeah, but I mean, under the medical comparison, the Medicare levy, everybody can access it. Even if you're a multimillionaire, you can access it, and that's only fair. If you're paying a levy, you should be able to access it.
Yes, and you can cap it in terms of people who need to go beyond, for instance, a 50,000, cap it at 50,000. If you've got to go to court and go beyond it, then it can be means tested.
Under this system, who would you have deciding whether you could do it? I mean, now if you want legal aid, you've got to convince them you should get it. Under this system, I'm paying a levy, therefore I think I'm entitled. I've got a speeding ticket I don't like. I want a lawyer to go to court and represent me. Do I get them?
Yes. Why wouldn't
automatically?
You?
Well,
Yeah,
because
well,
it might be vexatious.
Yes. It's not necessarily we are a very trusting people. We believe, generally speaking, that speed cameras and that detection devices all operate accurately. If there is a situation that shows that they're not acting accurately and they're not giving a true and fair indication, why shouldn't you be able to challenge
it? That's my point. It might be that they're inaccurate. It might be I just want to cause trouble. Who is somebody going to sit in a panel somewhere and say, you can use this money for this or you can't? Or does everybody get it automatically?
Everybody gets it.
Oh, this is a lawyer's picnic.
It's not a lawyer's picnic.
It is.
Look, what it does is it enables those in the lower income group to have access to lawyers, and they are very reluctant to do so. I would hate to tell you the number of people that ring with legal problems who want to get access to lawyers but can't afford to get not even the first primary advice, because they're involved in some complex issue that's far more complicated than they first realise, but because of that fact they can't afford a lawyer. Now, why should they be deprived of having a lawyer? We live in a society where governments create more and more laws. It's more and more complicated, and we're faced with more and more difficult issues, and we need trained people to be able to help us.
We will take a break, take more calls for David Galbally, 96900 693 13 13 32. I have a text. What's next? Accountants, etc. This is a recipe to prop up lawyers.
Well, I certainly don't see it as a recipe to prop up lawyers. We're busy enough and we don't need to create more work. But what it is a recipe to help those that can't afford have access to advice which they don't get at the moment. And they get themselves into more difficulties.
I've also got a text from a very well-known architect who says it's a silly idea for lawyers, but we should have one for architects.
Well, that's right. Self-interest is very important, Neil.